The sun had bled halfway into the horizon when she heard the cry. Thin, hoarse, barely carried by the prairie wind. It came from near the well, just beyond the reach of her porch's shadow. She paused, a bundle of firewood pressed against her ribs, her eyes narrowing beneath the brim of her hat. That wasn't a coyote. It wasn't wind through brush, either. It was human, small, hurting. She laid the bundle down, slow and deliberate, and reached for the rifle propped against the doorframe. The metal was warm from the day's heat. Her cabin stood alone on the edge of nowhere, 10 miles from the nearest town and twice that from anyone she trusted. She lived this way on purpose. Some called her stubborn. Others called her haunted. The truth was simpler. People had cost her more than silence ever had. Bootsteps light. She crossed the yard, past her drying line in the old mesquite stump where she'd once split with beside a man she tried not to remember. Dust licked her boots. Her eyes scanned everything. The dry well, the trough, the sagebrush crawling like old bones across the earth. And there, just beyond the broken fence post, a figure lay curled in the dirt. It was a child, a girl. Her dress was torn, skin dusted in red earth, hair long and matted with dried blood. Symbols were painted down her cheeks, faded now but unmistakable. She was Comanche, no older than 11. One arm cradled against her chest, the other stretched toward the well. The woman didn't move at first. The wind shifted, and with it came the smell. Gunpowder, sweat, coppery blood. Her muscles tensed. This was no accident. This was a warning. Or a test. Still, she stepped forward. The girl stirred as the woman approached, lifting her head just enough to show eyes like storm-washed stone. Pain etched her brow, but something deeper kept her gaze steady. Suspicion, fear, and something harder to name. The woman knelt beside her, rifle still slung over her shoulder, and pressed 2 fingers to the girl's neck. Pulse, fast but strong. No visible fever, but she was shaking. Her lips moved, whispering something low and quick in Comanche, too soft to understand. Then she winced and reached toward her leg. That's when the woman saw the wound. Clean entry just above the thigh, crusted black, likely from a pistol shot. The exit wound was shallow. She'd been bleeding for hours. The woman stood. For 3 long breaths, she stared down at the girl, letting the decision burn through her ribs like old fire. Taking her in would mean trouble, maybe death. There were still bounties for helping enemy blood. Settlers didn't need reasons, only stories. A black woman harboring a Comanche child? That story wrote itself in flames. But then the girl's hand twitched again, fingers curling toward her boot, like she could drag herself the rest of the way. She was trying, still trying. The woman exhaled through her nose, bitter with memory. Then, wordless, she bent and lifted the girl into her arms. Inside, she laid her on the cot near the hearth and lit a fresh flame with flint and patience. The girl barely stirred. Only groaned once when the woman peeled away the torn dress and cut away the dried fabric near the wound. The bullet was gone, passed through, thank God, but the infection had already begun. She cleaned it with water she boiled herself, added whiskey for good measure, and packed it with crushed goldenrod from her jar. She worked without speaking, hands firm but careful, her mind jumping through memories she tried to leave buried. Afterward, she wrapped the girl in a quilt and left a tin cup of water near the cot. For a moment, the fire cast both of their faces into half shadow, one carved from time, the other fresh with pain. The girl whispered again, eyes fluttering open. She repeated the same word, Natosi. Then sleep took her. The woman sat in a rocker, staring into the flames until they blurred. That word, she'd heard it before. Years back, whispered by a dying half-Comanche man who'd save her life in a river ravine. It meant son or spirit, depending on how it was spoken. She wasn't sure which the girl meant, or she meant anything at all. Night fell thick. Coyotes called in the distance. The wind turned cold and mean. She didn't sleep, not fully. Dreams came in flashes, of chains rattling, of fire on cotton fields, of the time she buried a child-shaped bundle and never spoke the name again. Her past was a prairie of graves, and she'd learned not to dig too deep. When morning cracked gray and cold, She stepped outside with the rifle and her eyes half closed against the wind. The sky was cloudless, but smoke curled on a northern ridge, thin, vertical, intentional, a signal. And near her fence line, where the girl had crawled the night before, fresh horse tracks circled like a noose. She gripped the rifle tighter. They knew where she was. Behind her, through the warped cabin wall, the girl murmured in her sleep. Same word, same breath, not Tosi. The woman didn't know if it was a plea or a name, but she knew now what she'd invited into her home. She had saved the child, but something bigger had followed. The girl didn't speak much, but her eyes never stopped watching. Every sound, every shift in the air, she tracked it like a creature that had lived too long in fear. She ate in silence, hunched over the bowl like someone who'd learned food could disappear without warning. When she slept, it was shallow and restless, flinching at every floorboard creak or shutter knock. Her wound had closed, but the ache inside her hadn't. The woman didn't try to pry. She moved around the girl like she did around the ghosts in her fields, careful not to disturb, careful not to name. She tended her small vegetable patch, chopped wood when the wind was still, boiled water each night whether she needed it or not. It was how she kept order. Years alone had taught her that repetition could hold the wolves at bay. But now the rhythm was shifting. The girl's presence altered the space. The cabin, once filled with nothing but wind and wood smoke, now held breath, life, memory. And the woman didn't know if that made her stronger or vulnerable. On the third day, the girl drew in the dirt near the hearth with a charred stick. Circles, lines, strange jagged markings that weren't idle scribbles. They meant something. The woman crouched beside her and watched without speaking. The girl looked up only once and pointed to the center of the drawing. One, then she made a circle around it, then another and another, until there were 7 rings total. She pressed her palm to the outermost one and whispered a word that trembled in the air like old thunder. The woman didn't ask what it meant. Later, she rode into town. It had been months since she'd shown her face there. The road was familiar. Ruts, fences, a broken signpost with someone's bullet practice carved into the wood. When she dismounted near the general store, 3 heads turned. One man tipped his hat, but didn't smile. Another, the blacksmith, leaned on his hammer and watched her too long. A group of children played marbles near the feed crates. One girl looked up and asked loud enough to carry, "Why don't she ever talk to nobody?" Inside, she gathered salt, beans, bandages. Her coin was still good, but the storekeep narrowed his eyes when he noticed her buying double. "You expecting company?" he asked. She met his gaze. "No." Outside, the preacher waited beside his chestnut mare. He was a tall man, always clean, always sweating like the sun had something personal against him. "You been keeping to yourself," he said, voice syrup thick with judgment. "That land of yours don't much like visitors, does it?" She didn't answer. "Some boys said they saw smoke near your ridge. Same day them Comanche signs showed up east of here." Still, she said nothing. He leaned closer. "You best be careful, sister. The Lord don't smile on secrets." That night, she watched the girls sleep and wondered what secrets the land had buried and which ones were about to claw their way out. The next morning, the girl was in the cabin. Panic came like a knife in the ribs. The woman threw open the door and scanned the yard. No tracks, no signs of struggle, just emptiness. Then she noticed the gate, unlatched and swinging, the same way it had when her dog went missing 3 winters back. She found the girl 200 yards out, kneeling in a patch of wildflowers that had no right to grow there. Her hand hovered over the petals, not picking, just remembering. The woman crouched beside her, wind tugging their hair in the same direction. The girl didn't look at her. She only pointed to the sky, toward the ridgeline, and whispered something that sounded like counting. Not numbers, but cadence, rhythm, repetition. That night, the girl finally said a full sentence. "My father's coming." The woman looked up from the hearth, where rabbit stew simmered slow and thick. She didn't ask how she knew, or when. She just nodded and ladled another spoonful into the girl's bowl. Outside, the wind howled. Not high and sharp like a storm wind, but low and rolling like drums. like hooves. The woman had heard it once before, years ago, during a raid on a cattle outpost 2 valleys east. The sound had rolled through the plains before the men even crested the hills. Thunder with purpose, fire with teeth. The girl sat near the fire, cradling a carved piece of what she'd found in the storage chest, an old token from a time before the woman had buried her name. The child traced the grooves like they were map lines. "My name," the girl whispered, "is fire on 2 sides." The woman didn't respond right away. She studied the flames, the way they danced without fear. "You know what happens when fire meets wind?" the woman asked. The girl nodded. "They feed each other." They didn't speak the rest of the night. Sleep came in waves, broken by wind and memory. The woman kept her rifle across her lap, and her boots on. She knew what was coming. Not just a father, not just warriors. Judgment. By dawn, the signal smoke had tripled. Long trails straight and black, rising from the hills like raised spears. Not settler smoke, not accidental. This was ritual. Message. A storm made of men. She stood on the porch, watching the horizon. The girl stepped beside her, silent. The sun was just beginning to crest when the first shape appeared, distant, mounted, unmoving. Then another, then more, until the ridge was lined with silhouettes, like shadows carved into sky. 70 riders. Maybe more. They made no sound. But the wind carried something else. The smell of horse sweat, earth, and old blood. The woman adjusted her grip on the rifle and exhaled through her nose. The girl reached for her hand. The woman didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She let the child's fingers slip into hers. "They're not here to ask," she said. "No," the girl replied. "They're here to remember." And the woman understood then. This wasn't just about shelter. It was about consequence. The kind that rides on horseback and waits for no man's forgiveness. The horsemen didn't move. They sat their mounts like statues carved from war and dusk, a silent wall against the bleeding sky. The woman counted again, 70. No more, no less. Not a raiding party. A message, an accusation, a reckoning. She didn't step off the porch. Not yet. She felt the girl's hand in hers, small but unyielding. The child's eyes were fixed on a ridgeline, not in fear, but in recognition. The kind of knowing that comes from blood and loss. One rider began to descend. He rode slow, not with caution, but with the certainty of a man who did not expect to be stopped. As he neared, the woman saw the red handprint painted across his face, the war paint across his chest, the long braids tied with feathers darkened by age and ash. His horse was black, his eyes darker still. He stopped 10 paces from the porch. The girl let go of the woman's hand. Without speaking, she stepped off the porch and walked to him. The woman gripped the rifle tighter, but didn't raise it. Her breath thinned. The man dismounted. He didn't touch the girl, only looked at her, studied her like a father would a daughter who'd returned from a grave. His hand moved to his chest, and he spoke a word that cracked in the stillness like dry wood. Her name. Not her English name. Not a settler name. A name tied to flame and birth and legacy. The girl answered with a whisper, then looked back at the woman on the porch. One last glance, grateful, heavy, final. Then she turned back to the man and touched his hand. It was enough. The man looked at the woman now. There was no hatred in his stare, only the deep weight of memory, of a line not yet settled. He spoke low and slow in Comanche. The woman didn't understand the words, but she felt them. They hummed between them like smoke. The girl translated. He says you say what he thought was lost. He asks why. The woman didn't speak right away. The wind stirred her coat, lifted her hair. She stared at the girl, then at the man, and finally down at her own bare hands. "I knew what was to be taken," she said, "to bleed in silence, to pray to vanish. And I knew what it meant when someone didn't walk away." The man seemed to accept that. He nodded once. Then he lifted something from his saddle, a necklace of carved bone and stone, threaded with sinew and age. He walked to the porch, climbed the steps with the quiet dignity of a man who'd buried too many sons, and held it out to her. She didn't move. "Take it," the girl said. The woman accepted the gift with both hands. It was warm, pulsing with something older than language. "She is his last child," the girl said. "His daughter. His heir." The words struck harder than she expected. The girl turned to her father. They exchanged quiet phrases the woman couldn't follow. Then, for the first time, the girl smiled. Just a flicker. But it lit something in her face that had been cold since the moment she'd fallen near the well. They mounted together, the girl behind him, arms around his waist. He didn't speak again, but before they rode off, he raised his hand in farewell. Not peace, not alliance, but respect. The woman raised hers in return. The riders turned as one, wheeled their horses with silent coordination, and vanished into the ridgeline like smoke drawn back into the sky. When they were gone, the woman stood in the silence they left behind. The yard felt different, not safer, just emptier. She walked back into the house and closed the door. The fire still burned low in the hearth. The girl's quilt still lay folded beside the cot, but the room felt less like a prison and more like a memory. That night, the woman sat by the fire with the necklace in her hands. Her fingers traced the bones and stones. Each one had been carved, shaped, polished by hands that remembered things most men have forgotten. She wasn't sure if it was a gift or a burden. She dreamed of the river again, the one she crossed as a girl with chains still fresh on her skin and her name already lost. In the dream, the half-Comanche man who'd once saved her stood on the far bank, holding a child in his arms. Not her child, but not a stranger either. He looked at her and said nothing, but she understood. Some debts aren't owed. They're inherited. In the morning, she found something by the well, a carved stick, the same kind the girl had held. It was standing upright in the dirt, like a marker, a sign. The woman didn't touch it. She just stared at it for a long time, and then, without knowing exactly why, she began clearing the extra room, the one she hadn't stepped into in years. Dust clung to every corner, and the floor groaned like it remembered things she wished it didn't. But she swept it clean, washed the sheets, opened the window, just in case. The girl was gone, but not far. It began with dust on the horizon, fast-moving, uneven, the kind of trail made by too many horses and not enough patience. The woman spotted it from her porch, hand shielding her eyes against the early sun. It wasn't Comanche. She knew that by the way they rode, reckless, loud, uncoordinated. Settlers, armed ones, and coming straight for her land. She stepped inside, without a word, and reached for the Henry rifle. The fire in the hearth was cold. She hadn't lit it in 3 days. There hadn't been reason to. The girl was gone, and the world had been holding its breath ever since. But now it exhaled in gunpowder and boots. By the time they arrived, 5 riders, their coats dust-caked and rifles slung lazy but ready. She was already standing in the yard, calm as dry stone. The man in front was wide to the chest, eyes too small for his skull. His horse looked half-starved, mouth flecked with foam. He tipped his hat like manners could cover malice. "We heard you've been keeping wild company," he said. "Little red girl. Heard she was seen near your well." The woman didn't answer. Her finger brushed the edge of the trigger guard. Another man spat. That girl's kin raided 2 wagons near Cotton Ridge. Left behind 6 bodies. 3 of them children. "She wasn't there," the woman said. The first man leaned forward. Maybe not, but she's blood to 'em, and blood carries war." The woman's silence was heavy. Her eyes drifted to the horizon. No smoke this time. No signal fire. Just wind and sky. The third rider shifted, nervous. "They say 70 of 'em came down out of the hills a few nights back. Walked right past your place and didn't touch a thing. That don't seem strange to you." "It does," she said, "but I've lived with stranger." There was a long pause. Then the man's voice dropped. "We can't let her come back. If she does, you hand her over, or we'll take her." The woman didn't speak, but her stance shifted, the way trees do before a storm. They rode off without another word. That night, she didn't light the lamps. She sat by the cold hearth, the carved bone necklace in her hands, and waited. The air had changed. Even the crickets were quiet. It felt like the hours before something ancient wakes up. At first light, hoofbeats returned, but this time it wasn't settlers. She stepped outside and saw her again. The girl rode bareback, smaller than she remembered, yet somehow steadier. Her face was painted now. 2 new marks across her cheekbones, symbols the woman didn't know, but her eyes were the same, the kind that had seen too much and still refused to break. The girl slid off the horse and walked forward. "He said you wouldn't run," she said. The woman said nothing, just stepped aside to let her in. The girl looked around the cabin, nodding like she remembered every board and shadow. Then her face grew grave. "They're coming again. Not warriors. Not my people. The other kind." "I know," the woman said. The girl sat on the edge of the cot. "He's gone," she added quietly. "My father, he left us the old ways. Said we'd have to decide how to carry them." The woman looked at her. "And how will you?" "With both hands." Outside, the wind shifted. The first shot came without warning. A window shattered. The girl ducked. The woman grabbed the rifle, already moving. Smoke curled from the trees beyond the fence. Settlers had circled around, waited for the girl to return. They'd chosen cowardice in the dark. Another shot rang out, hitting the door frame. Splinters flew. The woman dropped to one knee, aimed, and returned fire. One of the riders fell, tumbling off his horse into dry grass. The girl crawled to the hearth, pulling the old pistol from beneath the floorboard. Small, loaded, forgotten by the years, but not by her. She fired through the broken window, the shot cracking louder than her bones could justify. Another man cried out and fell. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, the yard was littered with broken men and hot silence. Only 2 horses remained, blood soaked into the earth. The woman stood slowly, chest heaving. A graze burned across her shoulder, but she was upright. The girl had not been hit. They didn't speak for a while, only listened to their breath, to the cooling guns, to the wind that returned like it had been watching. Finally, the girl stood. She walked to one of the fallen men and picked up something from the dirt, a broken locket, still warm. She turned it over, then let fall back into the dust. "They never wanted to ask," she said, "only to take." The woman nodded. Her fingers shook as she reloaded the rifle, but her voice was steady. "We don't give easy." "No," the girl said. "We don't." By afternoon, the dead were buried. The horses were fed. The blood had been scrubbed off the porch, though some stains wouldn't lift. The woman watched the girl collect stones and stack them in a circle beside the well. 7 rings again. Only this time, she placed the last stone at the center, not the first. "Means something different now," the girl said. "What's it mean?" She smiled, small and tired. "Beginning." That night, they lit the fire together. The woman cooked rabbit stew, while the girl spoke soft Comanche words into the flame, like prayer or memory. Outside, the land was quiet. When the woman finally spoke, her voice was low. "You can stay, if you want." The girl didn't look away from the fire. "I know." The woman smiled then, just once, and in that flicker, something inside her loosened, an old grief, a name long buried, a child lost not to death but to time. They sat in silence until the stars came, and though neither said the word, they both felt it settle in the walls. Home.